What size of Wacom tablet do you need? Is bigger better? Do you need to get the biggest one possible? Or will one of the smaller ones do the job? That's what I want to discuss and answer in this video. Now, I think that the basics here are pretty simple. The larger the Wacom tablet is, the more room you have to work and the more fidelity you're going to have. Especially if you're working on a large screen, it basically just means that you're going to have more fidelity in your strokes, and it's going to be less a matter of kind of fiddling around and trying to draw very small here when you're actually seeing a very large image up there on the screen. Other obvious issues are the physical size. Do you need to take this with you to school or somewhere like that? Does it need to be portable? And do you actually have room for it on your desk or in your life? But in addition to those basic concepts, I think there's a few more things that really can play into this idea, and I want to cover them in this video. Hopefully so you don't make the same types of mistakes I made when I bought my first tablet. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name's Mcburnie. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and most of that has actually been digital. I started out with a very, very small Wacom tablet way back in the day before digital art was cool. And I always wanted to draw cool stuff from my imagination, and that is what this channel is about, and also comics and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, you can check out my free quick start guide. It's aimed to get you up and running quickly with your own line and color style and process in Photoshop. Link will be in the description. It's free, go check it out. So, as I said, my first Wacom tablet was actually quite small. It was something that was imported from Japan, and it just kind of came into my life in the sort of late 90s. And that was when digital art was just kind of taking off, or it didn't really feel like it was taking off. It felt like it was this weird thing that might not go anywhere. But again, I've bought a wide variety of Wacom tablets and Wacom products and iPads, and I actually have a Huion tablet in the studio as well. So, you know, I've got a little bit of experience about this, and I've also taught a lot of students in person over the years, over the last sort of decade. And I've heard all of the trials and tribulations. All of my friends really are freelance artists, and we've all had to deal with these topics, right? Do you need a Cintiq or a Wacom or an iPad? Do you want a big Wacom or a small Wacom? In this video, we're talking about big versus small Wacom, and I think it's actually a really, really important point. And again, as I said, one of the reasons for that is that I have made poor purchasing decisions in the past. This is a Wacom Intuos 2, and it was the biggest one you can buy. And it's literally almost as big as my sort of Wacom Cintiq 32 Pro, and I think it is actually as big as a Wacom 24 Cintiq Pro. And this thing was huge. And the real problem was both that it was just too big for my life. I just didn't have the desk space for it. And I think that can be a major issue. As I said, you know, earlier, it's also just a lot of work to kind of move your hand, you know, across that amount of space all the time. And again, it just wasn't really what I wanted. Actually, a smaller one was better for me, certainly at the time. So I bought that Wacom product, and I actually ended up using a very much similar product, like a smaller sort of Intuos 2 that would have been the same size of this. Obviously, it would have looked the same as that other one because it was back in the early 2000s. But again, what I found is that for most people, the sort of too long didn't read of this entire subject is just sort of the medium Intuos Pro is normally a really, really good bet. But that's not always the case, and I think there's another, you know, few little nuances to this that can be really important. And it's also important to discuss, you know, some of those smaller tablets. If you're beginning out, some of the smaller ones are cheaper, and, you know, you might be wondering, like, what do you actually get when you're dealing with, you know, like sort of small, medium, or big? Well, it's important to note now that you can't really buy a giant Wacom tablet like that one, like the Intuos 2 12 by 18 inch. You are much more likely to buy a large Wacom Cintiq drawing screen, again, like the ones that you're seeing behind me there. Typically, you're dealing with a, quite small tablet where, again, the drawing surface is going to be, sort of about this big, or you're going to be dealing with a medium tablet surface where, again, the drawing surface is going to be about this big, or I think they do make a slightly larger one than this. And again, what I found is that the medium one is the one that's going to fit in a backpack. It's the same kind of size as a laptop, and it's just going to be the best mix of all of them. The obvious drawback with a much smaller Wacom is you're sort of dealing with both, just the problem of, translating these small strokes into big ones on the screen. It perhaps wasn't such a problem when I was learning digital art 20 to 25 years ago because all the screens were small and they were really rubbish. So right now we have this wealth of fairly, good, even the cheap screens are often going to be 20 plus inches. And if you compare a small Wacom tablet to that, often, you're kind of drawing, really small here, and your brain is kind of seeing it big, and that can be a little bit of a disconnect. Now, obviously, you might have a laptop, and again, in that case, just having a really small, simple Wacom tablet might be a good way to go. But I do recommend, if you can at all, to invest in the Wacom sort of Intuos Pro line at your soonest possible convenience. I think the quality of the product is a lot better, the fidelity of the pen is a lot better, and that really is what I have experience with. You can get really, really cheap small tablets these days, but again, I don't really have any experience with them. My experience has been that if you buy one of these tablets, again, even the Pro one, it might be hundreds of dollars, $300-$400, again, depending on where you are in the world. But from my experience, these things last forever. So it's mostly a matter of thinking, what do you actually need for the next 10 years? Because if you treat these things well, they will last a fairly long time on average. So as I said, the major concerns you're actually going to have are around physical space, and this is something you do have to consider. What I would recommend is actually measure out how big the thing is using the specifications you find on the page, and just check, does that fit in front of your laptop? Does that fit your particular life? This is very much specific to you, but all I would say is you can be surprised, as I said before, at the degree to which product specifications that you read kind of can overwhelm you to a degree and actually become quite frustrating and a little bit embarrassing because, again, you kind of are imagining, oh, big is better or small is better or whatever, and then you get it and it doesn't really fit in your life. So, again, you might have a big 17-inch laptop, you need to fit that, you've got a backpack, again, just measure out the Wacom and, figure out whether that fits there. If you're just using this at home, then, just make sure that's going to sit nicely on your desk. Do you have desk space? So you can see around me, I have a huge variety of screens. I have multiple workstations in my studio, and I have, the Wacom Pro 32. Now, this thing is just absolutely huge. This is a Cintiq, so it's different, but the concept is that it actually took me a significant amount of planning to figure out how to even fit this in the room and make it work. And then it took me about a day of drilling holes in desks and sort of organizing it and arranging it. So that's a completely separate issue, but it does speak to the fact that you need to actually consider the physical size of this, because if it just kind of fits your life nicely and you can kind of, make it work, then everything will just kind of be good. Now, in addition to these ideas of practicality, we can also discuss the actual implementation of, how the size of the Wacom tablet actually affects your drawing, because that's really what this is about, as well as, how does this affect your ability to create digital art? I think that we can conceptualize this by breaking artists down into sort of two broad groups, let's say. Again, this is very simplistic, but I think it might help your decision. You normally have drawers and painters. Now, if you're into drawing, which is kind of where I come from, one of the things that you want more or less is kind of more room to make those marks. And also, the bigger the Wacom tablet, the more you're going to be able to use your whole body. As they often say, use your shoulder. I have a whole video on that if you want a little bit more information on that. But again, my way of thinking about this is we use our whole body to draw. If the Wacom tablet itself is quite small, we're often using, if you're trying to get real precise line work, you often end up using a lot of fingers, right? A lot of like kind of really small marks. And what that can lead to is a little bit more kind of RSI potentially. If you don't really figure out the ergonomics of it, if the screen you're drawing on is really small, you can get really fiddly. And that can both affect the type of lines that you make, right? Because you just tend to be a little bit more fiddly. You're less kind of flowy with those lines. It's a lot harder to kind of, again, draw with your whole body, draw with your arm as opposed to just your finger. And in a lot of cases when you're drawing lines, you really need that flexibility. So having a larger tablet is generally beneficial if you're drawing line work. Conversely, if you're painting, and by painting, I mean you're doing this digitally, but you're not really trying to draw precise lines. You're sort of drawing larger strokes, and you're sort of adding detail potentially at the end. What you tend to find is the digital ability for you to kind of zoom in or zoom out will kind of account for your ability to kind of make precise marks when you need to make precise marks painting, or broad strokes when you need to make broad strokes. So digitally, painting can actually benefit in some ways from a smaller tablet for one reason. Your speed is greater. Those things that can work against you when you're drawing small for line work, where often you actually need to see the line as you're drawing it at a relatively large size for it to work. That's just kind of how drawing lines works. Conversely, when you're doing painting, often we are thinking more conceptually, and you can sort of zoom the window down and make quite broad strokes. And then once you kind of know what the painting is going to look like in aggregate overall, you can then zoom into it and start to make more precise marks. And the speed at which you can sort of move and make those broad strokes with a very small tablet can actually be beneficial. And I've heard a lot of really, really high-end good artists say that they actually prefer the smaller Wacom Intuos product, even though, again, these are people who could buy absolutely anything on earth, art tool related, right? There is probably no limit to their budget. They actually prefer, in some instances, to use the smaller one. Again, I think there's something to that. So a lot of this has to do with your particular style. I don't know what people particularly need if they're doing, 3D sculpting or whatever, but I would imagine also, you can probably zoom in and zoom out, and really what you're just after is that pressure. So a lot of what you need comes down to kind of what you actually plan to do digitally with this tool. So it could be said in general, if we were to kind of sum up and give you some general advice, the smaller the Wacom tablet is, the better, right? It's going to be more ergonomic to carry around, to move around. It means on your desk, you're more likely to be able to get it where you need to have it on the desk, so that your ergonomics are actually going to be better. The downside of the small tablet is if you actually need to do line work, it's going to be challenging to draw on a very small sort of fiddly tablet. And you may find that if you are kind of, again, going to do a lot of sort of noodling or fiddling, that you might run into, potentially some RSI or sort of, hand, arm sort of problems if you're just kind of noodling in a very small space. So it really is a little bit, maybe opposite to what you might imagine. You might imagine sort of get the biggest one you can. I think really the takeaway is to get the smallest one you can. And again, what I find is that actually these days, the sort of Intuos Pro Medium is actually a really good mix of being quite small physically and actually giving you quite a nice amount of room to work with. So again, that is generally my recommendation when people ask. And again, you can get smaller ones, you can get bigger ones. I don't think there's any problem with sort of getting a smaller tablet if you're just a beginner, maybe you're in high school, and you just want to try this out, just get a small one, play around with it. In that case, again, I'd almost say, just spend almost the least amount of money you can on it and just get you know, just sort of get stuck into it, feel out what this is about, and later on, again, save up for something that is a little bit more on the professional side, because again, once you can buy it and have it, you know, it'll last a long time and you'll get used to it. And I think that's, again, the most important thing here. Just remember, you'll adapt to the tool, whatever it is, as long as it's not a sort of circa 2000s 12 by 18 Wacom Intuos 2, because I never adapted it to this thing. It just hung around and I don't even know why I still have it. Anyway, hopefully that was interesting. That's all I've got for this one. Let me know if you got any comments or questions about this. Be more than happy to discuss this in the comments. Other than that, I'll catch you around. Happy drawing.